Okay, so you want to own a pharmacy. You picture a small storefront with a green cross glowing in the window, a line of regulars picking up blood pressure pills and cough syrup, and a quiet, steady business built on something every single person eventually needs. People get sick, people get old, people need the same prescriptions filled every month for the rest of their lives. It sounds like the closest thing to a recession-proof business that still exists. Here's the catch. In 2023, more than 80% of every prescription filled in the United States was for a generic drug, not a brand name. And generics, the very drugs everyone assumes are the bread and butter of a pharmacy, often produce the thinnest profit of anything on the shelf. A pharmacy can fill a prescription perfectly. Hand over the exact right pills, in the exact right bottle, follow every single rule to the letter, and still lose money on that one transaction the moment the paperwork clears. Not because the pharmacist did anything wrong, because somebody else, a company the patient standing at the counter has never heard of, already decided what that prescription was worth, weeks before the patient ever walked in. So if pharmacies are constantly handing out products worth hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, why do so many owners struggle to pay themselves a living wage? The answer starts with what it actually costs to open the doors in the first place. Getting into this business does not start with buying medicine. It starts with paperwork, and the paperwork is not cheap. A pharmacist in charge license, state pharmacy permit, a federal registration with the Drug Enforcement Administration just to legally handle controlled substances. Enrollment with Medicare and Medicaid, which alone can take up to 3 months. State permits can take anywhere from 2 to 4 months on their own. Add the build-out of the physical space, the plumbing, the electrical work for refrigeration units, the shelving, the counting machines, the point-of-sale software, and you are looking at a realistic all-in startup cost somewhere between $400,000 and $800,000 before a single customer walks through the door. One detailed breakdown of a typical independent pharmacy launch puts the total cash needed by month 6, once you include payroll before the doors even open and enough working capital to survive the slow first months, at around $647,000. And that number is before you've stocked a single shelf. Opening inventory alone can run $70,000, $80,000, even $100,000, because pharmacies cannot simply stock a little of everything. You need enough of the right drugs, in the right quantities, sitting on a shelf, waiting for a prescription that might come in tomorrow or might not come in for a month. Technology alone, the pharmacy management software, the verification systems, the security cameras required to track controlled substances, typically costs another $25,000 to $50,000 just to get running. There are really 2 paths into this business, and the price tag changes depending on which one you pick. The cheapest way in looks like buying an existing, already licensed independent pharmacy with an established patient base and existing insurance contracts already in place. It sounds like the obvious choice, since someone else already absorbed the licensing delays and the slow first months of near-zero revenue. But existing pharmacies rarely sell cheap, because a buyer is also paying for goodwill, for the years of trust the previous owner built with the community, and for a patient list that took a decade to assemble. The more expensive path is building a brand new pharmacy from an empty commercial space, which costs less upfront in goodwill but far more in construction, permitting delays, and the months of paying full rent and insurance with no revenue at all coming through the door. Neither path is the cheap one. One trades cash for time. The other trades time for cash. Most new owners plan for 6 to 12 months between deciding to open a pharmacy and actually opening it. And here's where the first hidden cost creeps in. Every month of delay is a month of rent, insurance, and loan payments with zero revenue coming in. Contractors run late. Inspections get rescheduled. Insurance credentialing, the process of getting approved to bill insurance companies at all, can take another 30 to 90 days on top of everything else. Owners who budget 6 months of pre-opening costs frequently find themselves paying for 9 or 10, so the doors finally open. Now the real costs begin. First, rent, which in a decent retail location can easily consume 10 to 20% of monthly revenue before anything else is paid. Second, labor, which for a pharmacy is not optional overhead the way it might be for a retail shop, because federal and state law require a licensed pharmacist on site at all times the pharmacy is open, and pharmacists command real salaries. The median pay for a pharmacist in the United States was $136,030 a year as of 2023. Multiply that, across the hours a pharmacy needs to stay open, add pharmacy technicians, cashiers, and a pharmacist in charge who often earns more. And payroll becomes the single largest line item most owners face, frequently outpacing every other expense combined. Third, insurance, liability insurance, property insurance, and the kind of professional liability coverage a business handling controlled substances simply cannot operate without. Fourth, inventory financing. As pharmacies begin stocking increasingly expensive specialty medications, the cost of simply carrying that inventory on a line of credit, waiting for reimbursement, starts eating into cash flow before a single one of those drugs is even sold. And this is where most first-time owners make their first mistake. They assume that once the drugs are on the shelf, the money that comes back from selling them is simple. It is not, because the price a pharmacy pays for a drug and the price it gets reimbursed for that same drug are set by two completely different forces, and the second one is not something the pharmacy controls at all. Meet the three companies that quietly decide what almost every pharmacy in America gets paid. They're called pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs for short, and here's the simplest way to understand what one actually does. Imagine you're the pharmacy. You buy a bottle of pills from a wholesaler for $80. A patient's insurance plan hires a middle company to negotiate, on the insurance plan's behalf, exactly how much you will be paid when you hand that bottle over. That middle company is the PBM. It never touches the medicine. It never sees the patient. But it decides down to the penny whether you make money or lose money on that bottle. A pharmacy might charge $100 for a drug and discover after the claim processes that the PBM will only pay $92 for it. The contract explaining exactly why is often thousands of pages long, filled with reimbursement formulas that even experienced pharmacy owners describe as nearly impossible to fully decode. There are three of these companies that matter more than every other player in the industry combined. CVS Caremark, owned by CVS Health, Express Scripts, owned by the insurance giant Cigna, and Optum Rx, owned by United Health Group, the largest health insurer in the country. Together, these three process roughly 80% of every prescription claim filed in the United States. Not 80% of some niche segment. 80% of the entire national prescription market runs through three companies most patients standing at the pharmacy counter could not name if you asked them. In 2024, Express Scripts overtook CVS Caremark as the single largest player, processing 30% of all claims nationwide, after winning a 5-year contract to manage benefits for 20 million people previously served by its biggest rival. CVS Caremark still processed 27%. Optum Rx processed 23%. Here's why that concentration matters so much. When three companies control 80% of the customers a pharmacy can possibly serve, a pharmacy does not really negotiate with them. It accepts what it's offered, or it stops being able to fill prescriptions for 80% of the patients walking through its door. And increasingly, these three PBMs are not neutral middlemen sitting between insurers and pharmacies. 5 of the 6 largest PBMs in the country are now owned by companies that also own a health insurer, meaning the same corporate parent that decides how much your pharmacy gets paid may also own competing pharmacies down the street. So far so good, if a little unsettling. Now let's talk about what can go wrong once that contract is signed. Sounds like a straightforward if lopsided business relationship? Well, almost. Here's the problem. Sometimes, a pharmacy fills a prescription and loses money on it every single time. Not occasionally, not as a rare mistake, but as a mathematical certainty built into the contract. This is called negative reimbursement, and it happens when the price the pharmacy paid to acquire the drug is higher than what the PBM will pay the pharmacy back. A pharmacy might pay $150 for a medication and receive only $140 in reimbursement. Every bottle sold at that price is a guaranteed loss, and owners often keep filling the prescription anyway, because refusing to fill it means losing the patient entirely, possibly for good. And then there's the part that makes the whole system feel less like a business deal and more like a trapdoor hidden under the floor. For years, PBMs were allowed to reach back into a pharmacy's bank account months after a prescription had already been filled and take money back. These are called direct and indirect remuneration fees, or DR fees, and the mechanism works like this. A pharmacy fills a prescription, gets paid, and believes the transaction is closed. Then, sometime 6 months later, the PBM assesses a fee tied to performance metrics, things like how many generic drugs the pharmacy dispensed or how well patients stuck to their medication schedules, and claws back a percentage of what it already paid. One government estimate found these retroactive fees grew by more than 100,000% between 2010 and 2020. As a share of total prescription sales, they grew from under 0.5% in 2015 to nearly 4% in 2023. Imagine running a shop where every sale you make this month might quietly get discounted after the fact, sometime around the holidays, and you won't find out by how much until the bill arrives. Owners compared it to discovering, months later, that every single sale had secretly been marked down without anyone telling them at the register. Forecasting cash flow under those conditions is nearly impossible because a pharmacy genuinely does not know whether last month was profitable until long after the month has ended. Federal regulators eventually stepped in. Starting on the first day of January in 2024, a new rule required these fees to be assessed immediately at the point of sale rather than clawed back months later. That fixed the timing problem. It did not fix the size of the fee. The money still leaves the pharmacy. It just leaves faster now and with a different name, performance fees or performance adjustments. Given all of that, you might ask a very reasonable question. If drugs themselves are this financially dangerous to sell, where does a pharmacy's actual profit come from? Mostly not from the drugs. Dispensing fees, front-of-store retail sales, flu shots and other vaccinations, medication therapy consultations, and diagnostic testing services frequently generate more real profit than the prescriptions themselves. A bottle of a common generic medication that costs the pharmacy around $4 can produce less profit than a single greeting card sold at the front register. High-volume pharmacies survive on thousands of small, low-margin transactions rather than a handful of lucrative prescriptions, the exact opposite of what most first-time owners expect walking in. The layout of the store itself becomes part of the revenue strategy. The shelves near the register, stocked with over-the-counter products, greeting cards, and seasonal items, are arranged deliberately to catch a customer's eye while they wait for a prescription to be filled, because those higher-margin front-of-store items can carry profit margins several times higher than the prescriptions themselves. Medication therapy management, a service where a pharmacist sits down with a patient managing multiple chronic prescriptions and reviews everything they're taking for dangerous interactions or unnecessary duplication, generates a fee for the pharmacy's time and expertise rather than for a physical product at all. It is, in a very real sense, the pharmacy selling its knowledge rather than its inventory, and it is often more profitable per hour than standing at the counter counting pills. Vaccinations reshaped this equation dramatically. During the COVID-19 pandemic, some pharmacy locations administered hundreds of shots in a single day, turning pharmacists into one of the most important vaccination networks in the entire country almost overnight. That single service line, something that barely existed in most pharmacies a decade earlier, became a meaningful chunk of total revenue for many independent owners. Here's what the overall numbers actually look like. Across the industry, the average independent pharmacy pulls in something like $3 million a year in total revenue. Its gross profit margin, meaning the percentage left over after paying for the drugs and products themselves, sits at roughly 21 to 22%, a number that has barely moved in a decade despite everything happening underneath it. But gross margin is not the number that matters. Net margin is. After paying rent, salaries, insurance, and every other operating cost, the average independent pharmacy keeps somewhere between 2 and 5% of total revenue as actual profit. On $3 million in revenue, that can translate to a net profit in the range of $60,000 to $150,000 a year, which then has to cover the owner's own salary, as well as whatever they hope to earn for